I would say increasingly they are taking advantage of the access to government procurement opportunities. At the initial stage, the key issue was awareness. Kenya is a very connected society, and one of the tools we have used to reach out to people is to encourage them to visit the PPRA website. And increasingly, not only at national government level, but especially at county level, you find people are very connected with government. And these procurement opportunities range from the smallest of things, stationery, food supplies, name it. They're taking advantage of these opportunities, and these are areas where SMEs can participate, youth can participate. There are no big barriers to entry in terms of tendering. They have various advantages under AGPO, including margins of preference, the requirements of tender securities, etc., being waived. No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. If I was to estimate at last count, when we estimated we had about 40 to 45,000 tenders under AGPO, I would say we are heading in the right direction, but we are not there yet. And people are still increasingly showing signs of either non-awareness of the levels or the advantages that they have under AGPO, but some of the more fundamental issues relate to issues of finance. And you will have noticed banks are also providing special funding for SMEs, youth and women. The president also consolidated the fund for the youth and women they were collapsed into a single fund, and the funds are building awareness for the AGPO disadvantaged groups to sort of latch into that network of funding and take advantage of it. I would say there are others which are more technical, which is also awareness of how to tender, in terms of latching onto the process, people not looking out for tenders when they're advertised. So to that extent, the SME sector and the more informal business sector, they don't latch on to, say, newspaper advertisements as quickly as more savvy people in the business sector would do. So to that extent, a lot more PR and lobbying needs to happen to encourage them to take advantage of these opportunities. I have to say that it's one of those things where you can't clap with one hand. You have to partner. Now, in this sense, we are partnering not only with non-governmental organizations. We've had a lot of support from people like GIZ, a lot of support to the World Bank in the procurement sector, and increasingly, we're encouraging counties to come on board. One of the whole aims of Devolution was to not only decentralize governance, but it was also to decentralize participation in development. Now, if somebody, like I said, in Kwale, in Turkana, in Mandera, wants to participate in development in their county, wants to participate in business with government, you then have an engagement point at the local level. So it is not so much that you have to rush to Nairobi to sit in the Ministry of Transport or the Ministry of Health to get a tender. You can actually participate at a very local level. Now, that decentralization means we now have effectively 47 partners in every county who we can work with to deepen procurement participation. You would be surprised. Everything. Absolutely everything. Increasingly, we have found that, one imagined that it might be, the small common user items, the stationaries, the food stuff. But we find people, everything ranging from furniture to computer equipment, photocopying equipment. People are very, very enterprising. There are people who go out of their way, leave Kenya, go and import equipment that is not available locally. But even for locally assembled materials, as you can imagine, for the youth, things like furniture, where they have a margin of preference for locally sourced goods, they can participate at that level. These people have workshops, they make very good furniture which you and I buy from them. Why shouldn't government buy it? Why should the government go and buy a chair from China? when you can buy a chair from a very qualified technical person who's a carpenter making it in his workshop locally. Now, if you saw the police tender where the Minister for Interior said textiles, we're going to do our uniforms from local manufacturers, and local textile manufacturers are participating. Yes, those might be the larger manufacturers, but when you drill down, the same principle applies to small items that different counties will procure. It has posed a challenge, because if you think about particularly the disadvantaged groups, they're operating from a platform of very thin capital. So if your capital ends up being tied up for 6 to 8 months, they don't have the financial shock absorbers to deal with such delays. But the president stepped in and mandated that pending bills be resolved, and a lot of work has gone into that. A lot of settlements have happened, particularly in the latter half of 2019. Money was released, payments have been circulating, and particularly for the smaller procurements, those have been a priority in terms of settlement. And from the PPRA perspective, we're increasingly encouraging people who have issues with delayed payments, because you can't enter into a procurement without a budget. It is against the law. So for us, when it comes to payments, and if the contract says you shall be paid within 45 days, it has to be within 45 days unless there's a problem with delivery of the goods, or there is a query as to the legality of the tender. But in most cases, you find that it has habitually been government delaying payments, procuring entities to that extent, and this is where you find bedeviling issues like corruption. Right now, off the top of my head, I think there's two low-hanging fruits in this sector. One is several banks have announced segregated funds for SMEs, and this is something that the youth, women and persons with disabilities should take advantage of, because these segregated funds are available at competitive interest rates, and they are funds that are sequestered for these particular sectors. The second is obviously the government funding mechanisms. Now, what used to be the youth fund, the women's fund, all collapsed into one, is now a fund that assists SMEs. People should go to those websites, take advantage of what has been segregated for them. Persons with disabilities, like I said, are registered, so they get direct access to these funds. Now, if you have an opportunity, it is evaluated on merit. The funds are not sort of dished out without proper audit, but it means they have a shortcut where they won't have the rigors of complying with securities, etc., before they get access to this funding. And that's the step the government has taken.